You are watching Double Doinkers Fantasy Football Podcast with Nick Meyer and Willie J. Today we bring to you the NFC South, NFC East deep breakdowns, prognostications, players. You're going to hear everything from both of these divisions. We're going to go over all the players. We're going to talk about all the things. If you weren't here last year, this is where we started off last year. This was our first set of episodes, and each one of these was like a 3-hour breakdown. Now, I think that this will go a little bit quicker than last year because we've said what we wanted to about a lot of these players already. But if you haven't listened to us and this is your first exposure, we will go over almost everyone in these teams. This is, in my opinion, a pretty good starting place for people who haven't played fantasy before, or if you just don't know what the heck's going on with the team, or you stepped out for a little bit and you're coming back. Welcome. And here is the NFC South and the NFC East. So, Willie, how are you doing? How's it going?
I'm doing good. I'm excited. This is I love just talking about football, and this is a great breakdown. I really enjoy how we have talked about each team, and so if you are doing your fantasy drafts and you want to revisit how each player you drafted kind of fits into the team that you drafted him from, and for Dynasty, I really enjoyed doing this last year. And this one's for the real sickos because it's May, and just hearing that music and getting started is getting me excited.
Yeah. This is it's starting again, but and not really. Again, last year Willie said it exactly right. I said this as well. This is for the sickos. You're here with us right now listening to this. We appreciate you because you're the heart blood of fantasy football. Really, you're the ones who keep this moving. I'm sure half of you are commissioners of your leagues. Just always thinking about it, and that's how I am. Unfortunately, I still find myself during the off season consistently checking all of my news sources for NFL news, even though 90% of the time nothing's happening at all. But here we are. So, but we do have some. There has been a lot of changes. Of course, it's a new season, as always in the NFL. Teams look pretty different. The NFC South, NFC East in particular have some changes, and we're just going to go over it because, there's always value. It doesn't matter what team you are in the NFL. You can be the worst team, and there's some hidden value that exists within your squad for someone's team.
I guarantee at least one team we talk about today is going to have a winning record and surprise a lot of people, or vice versa. The amount of parity in the NFL is a reason I love the sport. It's getting better in the NBA and in other major sports in the US, but in NFL, parity is king, and that's what makes it exciting. And some of it is injuries. Does swing a team, especially when it's a quarterback. But just the level of excitement you can get as a fan of pretty much any team except for the Browns and the Jets, going into the year with a new roster it's something to look forward to.
I'm a little jealous sometimes of Browns and Jets fans. As Raiders fans, it feels like every year I have the opportunity to feel good about myself, and then we just end up in the same places they are. So
just the mediocrity, dwelling in mediocrity is not the greatest.
It's not, but here I was hoping things change for everyone. Willie got to see the Bears make the playoffs, and I guarantee at least two teams that we talk about today will be playoff contenders.
At least two, yeah, that is true.
Maybe more, but at least two. Before we jump into the breakdowns, let's talk about a little bit of news, which there hasn't been a whole lot, but there has been one really big breaking piece of news that's happened just recently this week. Josh Jacobs, of course, has turned himself in to the police in his local area. He is charged with 5 different charges, at least 1 felony. I think the other 4 are misdemeanors. And as you may have heard, they're all pretty serious things related to domestic violence. Now, because we do the NFC North episode next, I don't think we're going to really jump too far into this. What I will say is that right now, anything you hear is speculation. Because we've seen with the NFL, they don't like it when things get too hot. This is happening at a time in the off season, in my opinion, that if these charges are all dropped, we might see Josh Jacobs play the whole next year. And if he gets charged with any of them, we might not see him for a long time or ever again. So the range of outcomes is so wide and so different. Yeah. It's hard to speculate.
When it comes to violence against women in the NFL, they don't have a great track record, and sometimes players will get serious suspensions and be held accountable, and sometimes absolutely nothing happens, even if they are found guilty or take a plea. I mean, I think a big recent case is James Pierce Jr. of the Atlanta Falcons. He was a rookie last year. He had some pretty serious charges. I don't recall if they were dropped or a settlement was reached, but I know he's not actively facing any suspensions. And we see this quite often. In the case of Josh Jacobs, one of the things that stands out about this is the fact that he not only has 5 distinct charges, but he has a felony strangulation charge. Um, you know, extremely, extremely serious allegations, and they are just allegations for now. But we've seen players be held accountable and have talks of suspension for less serious things. Felony strangulation is an extremely, extremely serious charge. We'll see how this plays out, but it's the kind of situation where Jacobs might not ever play in the NFL again. It's pretty serious.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if it'd be like if Ray Rice didn't have video, at this point, and if who knows what would have happened. And that's the hard part for me. It's like, yeah, if anything comes out and we have any definitive proof, it wouldn't shock me if he's like banned a season and then just gone.
Yeah.
But if video never comes out or like proof never comes out or what have you, it's just May.
Yeah.
And I think like it hit news pretty hard, but it didn't hit news that hard. So we'll see. And it's the ball's in the NFL's court.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's in a lot of people's courts, but
it's in the courts too.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting. I'm to being completely, unbiased here as a Bears fan, like I think, the best scenario is that he's held accountable if he's guilty and the Packers don't have a running back. Now, unbiased talking about this though, if Jacobs does miss time, the Packers do not have any depth behind him. So this is a very, purely from just entertainment fantasy perspective, this could be very interesting for the Packers and for Jacobs' career. So, we might not hear much news for a while, but this is definitely something to look out for.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, whoever ends up on the Packers, I don't think they're going to go with Marshawn Lloyd and whoever their 4th RB was last year. I think they're going to have someone add it to this team if he is gone. And if he is gone, it changes the way their offense works. But we'll talk more about that in a couple weeks. For now, let's just move into the breakdowns. Let's jump right into this thing because this could go for a while. We're going to start off with the NFC South. You may remember them for having one of the final week games that chose who got into the playoffs and who did not. And that was, of course, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Carolina Panthers were competing for a playoff spot. And the Panthers ultimately got it in one of the craziest meltdowns of a team that I've seen in a while, with the Buccaneers looking like the hottest thing in the world to falling off the face of the earth. But so the NFC South, always an interesting division. I have like my own personal thoughts about the teams as like just their identities in general, like regardless of what year it is. I have some thoughts about some of these teams, but I'll save that for the end. Okay, let's start off with the Atlanta Falcons. So the Atlanta Falcons, they went 8-9 last year. And they fired Raheem Morris. They fired their whole entire coaching staff because it just was not working. So they've got a new head coach in. He's Kevin Stefanski. Kevin Stefanski is a familiar name because he was the head coach of the Browns last year and many years prior to that. He brings in with him the offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees. He was the offensive coordinator for the Browns last season. Prior to that, he was the offensive coordinator for the University of Alabama. And then the defensive coordinator, Jeff Ulbrich. So this is a team that had Kirk Cousins just absolutely stink for them after Michael Penix tore his ACL. And I can't remember if his ACL was the same one or if it was a different one. I do know, I think it was both the second knee now that's been torn.
Yes, I believe he's torn both of his ACLs at least once.
So the team that like 2 or 3 years ago was clowned on for taking a quarterback after paying Kirk Cousins heavily now lost both of those quarterbacks for at least a little bit. And they brought in to at least take the hint for a little bit if Penix isn't ready, or to compete with Penix if he is ready. Tua Tagovailoa, another quarterback who has, I don't want to say flamed out of the NFL because he hasn't. Clearly, he's on the Falcons, but he's pretty close.
He's
Pretty
close. I mean,
close.
the Dolphins took a $99 million cap hit to cut him. So clearly, the Dolphins. I mean, the Dolphins. Looking at it in a vacuum, that looks pretty egregious. But the Dolphins are in full rebuild. They also have a new coaching staff. So Tua, just signing a vet minimum to be with the Falcons doesn't mean he's washed. He's not inherently just a backup quarterback forever now. This is one of probably his last chances to be a starter. But I think it's a great deal for the Falcons because with Cousins gone now, and Penix having torn his ACL in November, like it feels like Tua is most likely going to be the Week 1 starter, and the fact that they had someone who was at least starting in the NFL last year is really a bonus for them, I think.
It's interesting too because I think with Tua, this is not only a great deal, but like having two left-handed quarterbacks. I don't know how much the side you throw from changes your offense, but from what I've seen, at least of left-handed quarterbacks coming in and coming out, it seems like it does change it pretty significantly as far as where the X receiver is.
Yeah, and
So
where the offensive line lines up, and that plays a bigger difference.
So I think that this was a pretty good catch for them getting Tua. Now, mind you, what we saw of Tua in the last couple of years has been really awful. It was really poor quarterback play that couldn't really sustain any sort of fantasy relevance. So you'd have to hope that if he comes in, he can actually sustain this relevance. But let's talk about who's actually on this team right now. So you've got Penix, you've got Tua Tagovailoa. Not super exciting. You do have the running backs though, and this is where like your bread and butter is, especially because Kevin Stefanski, when he had success with the Browns, was not solely through the running game, but primarily through the running game. He is a guy who loves a good running game, and he gets to work with Bijan Robinson, who, we all know how good that guy is, and also Brian Robinson. And already, if you are a trading person, you already have found out the exploit in this year's draft is that B-Rob and B-Rob are on the same team. One is named Junior, and it is the backup Brian Robinson Jr. But how could they pick up Brian Robinson Jr. when they have Bijan Robinson? Are we being toyed with, Willie?
It seems like it reminds me of on the Browns when the Browns had Ned Chubb along with Nick Chubb. I'm just kidding. No, it is confusing. It is a good pickup though, I think, because the Falcons lost Tyler Algier, and we didn't really see it from Brian Robinson last year on the Niners because CMC was healthy the whole year, but he's a very solid RB2. So, there's some nuance here, but I think Algier to Brian Robinson is a pretty solid, 1-to-1 replacement. And we saw, regardless of who the RB2 is in this offense, Bijan is the dominant player, and he has that easy, not only RB1 overall upside, but like 101 draft pick kind of upside going into the year.
And we have seen with the Kevin Stefanski-led offense, because although they have Tommy Rees as the offensive coordinator, it's going to be a Kevin Stefanski-led offense. In 2020, I believe was the year, the Browns were the third overall ranked offense, and it was almost solely on the back of Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Mm-hmm. And both of those were solid producers for fantasy. So if you think that there's a world in which, Brian Robinson has that Kareem Hunt role, which a little iffy for me because I don't know how he is as a pass catcher, but maybe there's something there. They could get a lot of touchdowns.
Yeah.
And I think so. Like this is a backfield I love. Bijan Robinson. There's not a lot to talk about. He's like you said, a potential number 1 overall pick already. So like if you like Bijan Robinson's game, I don't really see it having a significant statistical downgrade from this news. This is good news for him as far as I can tell. Mm-hmm. And then Brian Robinson Jr. maybe more relevant than Tyler Algier was because he'll probably get more consistent work. I think the run game is going to be heavily leaned upon regardless of who starts at quarterback.
Exactly. And we saw last year Algier, vulture quite a bit of touchdowns from Bijan. It's not like Algier was necessarily a draftable player except as a handcuff, but at the same time, like he was definitely streamable. And if Bijan does go down, like he's a great handcuff. We said that about him last year of CMC, but I do think that in this offense compared to the Niners offense last year, I think Brian Robinson is a much more valuable asset than he was last year.
Yeah, and I mean, okay, so let's take a look at the pass catchers on this team as well, because this is part of it, right? So the pass catchers on the Falcons, so you have Drake London. They also drafted Zachariah Branch, I believe, in the 3rd round. Then you've got who? Jahan Dotson. We've seen one flash from Jahan Dotson, not really anything consistent. And when asked to be more than what he was prior, well, he went from the Commanders to the Falcons. So you can understand how it didn't go very well for that. We have Kyle Pitts, who had probably the best game of any tight end in fantasy football last year. And
one of the best ever games. Yeah.
Just an insane game, but also has not been able to do that by any means until that one particular game. Like he had an okay rookie season that was a ton of yards and no touchdowns. And then he's just been a complete dropout. I mean, if you're playing and you know Kyle Pitts, he's forever the golden guy who you cannot get because he will tank your season. Unless you happen to play him one week where he scored over 50 points.
Yeah.
And you'll see a lot of things about where he finished as a tight end last season and like his potential for the future. Just remember that 50-point game alone probably buoyed his whole entire season. Without that, he was not doing anything consistent. He wasn't really a playable piece.
I think I raised his overall tight end finish like 9 or more spots, which sounds ridiculous, but like he's a tight end, so like there's not a lot of fluctuation there. I think that if he hadn't had that big blow up game, he would have finished as a mid end or tight end 2, and depending on your league and your roster, tight end 2s aren't even inherently rosterable. So He's not somebody to get excited about.
Yeah. So here's the question for me. All right. So Kyle Stefanski, he's coming off of 2 really terrible seasons with the Browns. Now, of course, we know with the Browns, there's quarterback issues, there's running back issues, there's a lot of issues. But he finished 32nd in offensive efficiency in 2024 and 2025. 2 years in a row as the worst offensive team in the league. He comes to Atlanta with better players.
Much better.
And do we like him enough to then draft the pass catchers on a team where the quarterback is still a question mark?
I mean, yeah, looking at the pass catchers with the running back, I would not be, it's not a huge upgrade, but it's nothing. He's not going to be worse than it was offensively last year for the Falcons. It can only get better with Stefanski, I think, in the run game. With the pass catchers, I think there's some diamonds in the rough here, but this team as a whole, despite the upgrades and the new changes, I don't really see much, movement from where some of these guys finish. I think that, Drake London is obviously the standout. If he hadn't gotten injured last year and missed a few games, he would have been a wide receiver 1. And I think that he is worth, a 2nd round pick or around there this year. Mm-hmm. And that's saying this for both what we've seen with him in Penix and what we've seen Tua produce in the past with receivers like Hill and Waddle. And, Tua is not the same quarterback he was 2 or 3 years ago, but London has produced with Desmond Ridder. So I think that London only getting better seems pretty logical. I don't know if he's going to blow up into a top 5 wide receiver, but he definitely has that potential in those traits.
Yeah, he has a lot of talent. He can take over games at a time if he's given the opportunity. With the Falcons, they're a weird team. We see it happen a lot. So is there any situations between the starting quarterbacks where if it's Penix or if it's Tua that this matters to you?
We'll have to see week 1 Tua or, a couple weeks of Tua to get a read on how he plays. But I think this is kind of a win-win because either Tua returns to his form a couple years ago in terms of how he feeds his receivers, and that benefits London, or Tua is so bad and Penix is back from the injury that we at least see what we saw from Penix and London last year, which was, pretty dang solid at times.
Yeah, so what I'm thinking with this team is let's say Drake London is going in the top 2 rounds again, right here, like the bottom half of the 2nd round. Is he worth that pick? Like, is that something that you're willing to, with the information that we have right now, put your name on and say, let's go get Drake London, pick number 19?
Yes, I do. I think that's around where I had him last year, and maybe a little bit higher. And you could say his ceiling is capped because, Penix, while he's played pretty okay at times, he hasn't been, elite. He hasn't turned into that like Drake May, Caleb Williams type 1st round quarterback that we saw. But having said that, I think I feel the same about London as I did last year, and a lot of what we predicted about his finish last year, injury notwithstanding, came to fruition. And I think that he's absolutely worth a 2nd round pick.
How about Kyle Pitts? I'm going to see him in that tight end dead zone, probably around round 4, round 5, round 6, somewhere in there. This is early guess. I think this isn't based on ADP at this moment at all because it's still the end of May. So, but are you willing to have him as your tight end one going into the season?
No, there's nothing that we saw from him last year, or nothing that we see from his age profile. Like if we're banking on a year, is it year six breakout? Like, in theory it could happen, but a year six breakout could come from like a Kate Otten as well. Kyle Pitts is always going to be drafted higher than he is relative to his possible breakout. So you can get an actual like tight end that has a higher likelihood of a breakout, like probably 10 rounds later, and make it work.
I suppose I've buried the lead here a little bit because I want to ask you about one of your favorite players from last year, just because they do have another wide receiver. He's not his first stint on the team, but he is new to the team this year in this version of it. We also have Olamide Zaccheaus joining the team, formerly with the Bears. Hence all the jokes about the Bears. Anyway, so does Olamide have any role? Like any of these players that aren't these two have a role? Because I think for me, the beauty of Drake London and Kyle Pitts in any format is the fact that I think the passing game is going to be funneled through those two. I don't really see a lot of breakout potential for these other guys. There's Zachariah Branch, who I suppose just being a rookie is a little exciting, but other than that, I don't know. So do you see any of these role players as someone who you may want to take a flyer on?
I mean, so I would say that like, Jahan Dotson and, Zaccheaus are both players that could potentially break out, but like, using the comparison of Kate Otten and Kyle Pitts, like we could see like I don't know, like a Parker Washington on the Jaguars or a Pat Bryant on the Broncos break out just as likely. I don't think either of these guys are draftable. I think at best they can replicate maybe what we saw with Darnell Mooney a couple years ago, and to clarify, a couple years ago. So, they're streamable guys to watch. And if London goes down, like there's going to have to be an alpha here, and it could be Zaccheaus or Dotson. But in terms of draft strategy, and I've gone on record talking about him before, but I really, really do like Zachariah Branch. He's a third round rookie out of Georgia. I'm a bit biased because I watched him as a rookie in college at USC with Caleb Williams, and he came out as a 5-star recruit. So he looked awesome with Williams, and you can make the argument that Tua is the best quarterback he's played with since Caleb Williams, because he had Gunnar Stockton at Georgia last year. But having said all that, like I think Branch is somebody that I personally am going to be targeting in the last 2 rounds of my draft, just because of his player profile and really little to do with a strong faith in the Falcons offense or passing game outside of Drake London. But I really do like Branch as one of my favorite rookies. So if you're going to target these guys outside of London, I would fade everybody but a late round pick of Branch, perhaps.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And just for context, for last year, they finished top 10 in rushing yards, middle of the pack in rushing touchdowns, and then middle of the pack passing yards, but bottom 5 in passing touchdowns. And I don't really see a huge Stefanski's profile says that maybe the rushing touchdowns will come up and everything else will probably stay pretty similar to what it was.
Having said that, though, the Stefanski's, inept offenses were coupled with the Browns' elite defense, and the Falcons' defense, it's a question mark right now. It could be really good. They've drafted really well the past couple of years, but I would be hard pressed to predict that we're going to see a repeat of the Browns' defense the past couple of years. So the run game being so good in Cleveland is because of elite running backs, but also because they were at least getting the ball back in the hands of the offense, and we might not see that as much this year.
Stefanski's such an interesting head coach to watch because people love his offenses. They think they're great, but we haven't seen anything even slightly productive since the Deshaun Watson trade was made.
Yeah.
So, does he have that ability to bring these players and the offense around him? Because the offenses have been god awful for an offensive minded coach, like regardless of who's playing, they're so bad. So, Falcons are an interesting one to watch. I don't have like a ton of faith in them personally. And just in general, this is one of those, not this year. In general, the Falcons are a team that unless they are fully stacked, I don't believe in them.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. But having said that, I mean, Bijan, expect him to repeat what he did last year. Yeah,
Bijan's a smash pick with a team with this like little over the top huge talent and also potential to score points. you're going to want the guy who's going to be the focal point of that. And Bijan, we've already seen, can do it. He has crazy skill, just awesome. So let's move on to the next team. So next up, we're going to talk about the New Orleans Saints. Last year, 6-11. Although managing to stay pretty competitive in a lot of games, you guess they wouldn't. They are relatively static coach-wise. They still have Kellen Moore as the head coach, Doug Nussmeier as the OC, Brandon Staley's the DC. They did add a couple different players here. Zach Wilson at QB, they've added because they want 3 vaguely startable quarterbacks. But no, they return with Tyler Shook, who flashed potential last year. He's one of the older quarterbacks that are drafted. So if he didn't flash potential, that would be bad, but he did. And so they've added Travis Etienne to their running back room, which Travis Etienne and Alvin Kamara, and it is an old Kamara who hasn't shown really the same level of skill as he's had in the past, but adding Travis Etienne and Alvin Kamara, so it looks like a pretty good running back room. And then you have this wide receiver group that added Jordan Tyson with an early pick. I believe it was 6. Maybe I am off on that.
8 or 9, I think. Yeah.
8 or 9. Okay. Yeah. So they've added what could potentially be debatably the best talent at wide receiver in the draft. And, then you've also still got the folks who were there, and Jalen Polk added, Juwan Johnson and Noah Fant at the tight end. I'm looking at this offense, and I'm looking at it very favorably right now, because I think last year was a particularly bad year for the Saints, and yet they still overperformed for what was expected. Mm-hmm. Kellen Moore is an offensive guy who's had a lot of really good offenses in the past. And me and Willie have talked a lot of time about him having a long leash, and I think this is where he has to start showing improvement. Not a ton. I don't think he has to be like Super Bowl contenders this year, but he has to show some improvement, and I think he will. I
had a lot of faith in him as a hire. I didn't have a lot of faith in the Saints last year as a team with their 20-year plus, I think, GM Mickey Loomis. They're not making a lot of changes, but we really did see the Saints kind of switch things up this past offseason in comparison to other years, like, drafting Jordan Tyson and, making some big free agent signings we'll talk about in the running game in a second. And, really committing to Tyler Shook, not having it be like, okay, well, we saw some stuff, but we're still going to bring in a veteran to compete because we don't really know for sure. Like, obviously Spencer Rattler's still on this team for now, but they absolutely committed to Shook at the end of last year. And they're really building around him. I mean, drafting a receiver in the top 10, Tyson is a risky pick based on injury history, but he has a lot of upside. But the fact that they took a receiver and focused on the offense with their top 10 pick really suggests that it's about building around Shook. There's really no question that he is the, unmistaken starter this year, it's just cool.
Yeah. And you know more about them as college players, but Jordan Tyson feels pretty solidly in like the Mike Williams sort of camp compared to Chris Olave. So it does feel like he's starting to set up his offense the same way he's had it in the past. And all of the offenses that Kellen Moore has had in the past, he's had 2 really good receivers, and they're playing different roles. One's more of a possession / route runner. One was a more physical jump ball guy. They've really worked, and both those players have been good for fantasy. So the wide receivers, Chris Olave had a great year last year. Like
I did not predict it. I thought he was going to be in concussion purgatory, but he really did prove it, and he looked really, really good. That was one of my worst takes last year.
So this offense, I'm excited for it. I think that you're going to have maybe some hype on this offense, but so players will go a little bit earlier than I want them to, but I don't think it's going to be over the top. I don't think we're going to see anyone threatening for the top 3 rounds in this offense. There's a chance that Chris Olave is right around there, but also like people have been burned by him so many times that I think there's really value on the Saints to be had.
There is, and you don't want to put a label on anything, but this on paper, this team does have that really big breakout potential, like we saw with the Colts last year, maybe more sustained throughout the year. But like they are that kind of team that people were writing off that have made a lot of good moves. And I do want to mention with the passing game in general, something I don't really ever talk about on the show, but I am going to break a little rule here and mention it. It's about the Vegas odds. And Tyler Shuck is currently set at 3,600 passing yards, which is around the same, if not more, than other QBs like Baker Mayfield and Jordan Love. Now, you can make an argument like a bad offense is going to pass a lot. So passing attempts might have some weight there. But 3,600 yards is a lot for a line for a quarterback who is relatively unproven and hasn't shown a lot of elite traits. Like if Tyler Shuck actually passes for 3,600 yards this year, that means the Saints are going at like at least 8 or 9 wins. Like, the defense can carry them enough under Brandon Staley. Like that's a solid line for Vegas and insiders to be looking at. So
I want to talk about this because it's one of the funnier stats for teams from last year. The Saints shockingly had over 4,000 team passing yards last year.
As a team,
they were top 10 in total passing yards. But here's where it gets bad. They're bottom 5 in passing touchdowns. This is the Derek Carr effect without Derek Carr even playing last year. They also were tied for the second worst rushing touchdown total. So like, if you can see like potential for, I don't know how it works team wise with positive regression, right? But like, it feels like there's definitely room there because if they can get this many yards, they're clearly not a terrible offense. They just might have been terrible in the red zone. And adding someone like Jordan Tyson may change things up significantly for them. Adding someone like Travis Etienne may change things up significantly for them because last year they didn't really have a running game.
No. I mean, Kamara, and who was the other guy last year? I'm actually blanking on who the big guy was.
Devin Neal? Sometimes?
For a couple games at least. I mean, he was the guy. Yeah.
There was the guy who Dennis Allen hated. That's not fair that that's the way I know him. That sucks.
Oh, the guy he got injured a lot.
Yeah, hammy guy. That sucks. I'm sorry, guys. But yeah, so I think that there's like a lot of room for improvement on this team. Now, here is interesting, I think, question. With the team that we saw have just zero running success last year, do you think that Travis Etienne is the answer to their running game? He has a perfect name for a New Orleans team. Etienne is just the exact right name you want for Louisiana. But can he now bring the swamp into the green zone? Oh, dang it. I almost had it, man. Into the end zone.
I'm going to go on record May 27th here. There's moving parts, but I'm going to go on record and say that I'm going to be overdrafting Etienne this year because, looking at his season 2 years ago in Jacksonville, when the Jags went 4-13, he did not have a good season. If you take that 2024 season out of his, history, he'd be looked at as one of the best running backs in the NFL, I think, at least in terms of fantasy. He had a really great year last year, albeit on the Jags, who were a really great offensive team. But he's coming into a team where Kellen Moore, in his first ever opportunity as a head coach, has a viable starting running back that is reliable, and they signed him to a 4-year deal. And I really think that Etienne, he's not going to be Saquon here, but I really do think that Etienne's skill set of, not only being a running back in his prime and a Kellen Moore offense, but the amount of times we saw Shuck check down last year and how good and versatile Etienne is as a pass catcher, like, I'm going on record in May, so things will change, but I could really see him being a top 5 finish at the running back position next year. I really do think, and that's less so just pure faith in the Saints offense or a team as a whole, and really just faith in Etienne and how this team looks at him and how they want to use him. I think he could be really, really, really good this year.
Well, I love the take. I'm willing to go there. I'm not there yet, but I am willing to go there because I like this idea. And Travis Etienne is very skilled. I mean, his down year 2 years ago was also the down year of a team that with Doug Peterson was looking to be better, and they just weren't, right? So like, it was a really bad year for the Jags in total. Yeah. And then last year we see him come back to life, really. And so he goes to the Saints, and as you were saying, he has a new lease of life now. If he comes out and he shows out, New Orleans is going to love him.
Yeah.
He's going to be their dude. So I like this. I'm not quite there in top 5 guess yet, but I could see top 10 easy. That's the same with Kamara. What's Kamara going to do here, right? Kamara has already looked pretty washed. Now there was rumors that they were saving him for next season at the end of the last, but you don't want that rumor in your NFL career. He's old. He can catch the ball still pretty well, but like, is he going to threaten at all or take any of this work in a significant manner?
I don't think so. And I mean, I think if anything, he helps ETN and keeps him fresh because we saw ETN compete last year for touches with the
Tootin.
Tootin, who is now the de facto RB1 on the Jaguars. And we saw him with Tank Bigsby for part of the year last year. We saw him with LaQuint Allen, who was another rookie that showed, some flashes. Like, I think that ETN's going into a backfield with less competition. And, Kamara can be there to help keep him fresh. Like, if ETN's playing 8 snaps and Kamara's playing 2 or 3, each quarter or whatever, that's still pretty dang good. I think that ratio is how I see it breaking down. And that's enough for ETN to, I think, really deliver.
Yep. So, Kamara, and this is without context of the other people's ADP, right? But like, if you were looking at a draft board right now, where would you guess he's going to go?
Kamara?
Yeah.
I'm pulling up here. I'm looking at the ADP for ETN, and this, again, of course, is in May. It looks like a lot of teams have him going in like the 40 range, which would be like a 4th round pick. And I can say already, I think it's going to go up, but I would absolutely smash ETN in the 4th round or even late 3rd at this point. I think that, at least on paper, he seems like a player that could be, like, I feel comfortable as my RB1 potentially. I haven't found Kamara here yet, but if I recall, he was going like in the 7th, 8th, 9th round maybe last year, maybe a little bit higher than that in some leagues, but I really don't think Kamara is going to be a player that's drafted in the single digits in any league this year.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. He burned teams pretty bad last year.
Yeah.
So okay, I'm looking at the Saints. That's basically it. There's not really a lot of other changes that are really significant to this team. They've got the same. I just think they're going to be better this year. I liked what I saw. I think Tyler Shook, he came in and he was an older rookie, so it makes sense that he looked good. Yeah. I think that he doesn't have like as high a ceiling necessarily as a lot of other quarterbacks, but I think serviceable is better than they've had for a while.
I don't think he's really one to target in drafts, but having said that, like especially if you're in a two QB leagues, QB Superflex, and he's sitting there in the late rounds to take, like, I think he has as much upside this year. And again, this is not a 1-to-1 and not disrespect, but I think he has as much upside as like a Bryce Young because he's got a really strong offense. He's a passing quarterback primarily, but he does get a lot of rushing touchdowns too, and that definitely boons his upside. So, maybe he is worth considering drafting this year, but I wouldn't like get excited about him as my QB1. But there's breakout potential. I think.
He feels like to me right now like the bye week fill-in that ends up playing a big part of your team because your quarterback 1 failed.
Yeah, that's a good way to. It reminds me a little bit. Like I had Sam Darnold 2 years ago on the Vikings, and I picked him up, and I was like, oh, he actually ended up starting most of my season. Yeah,
exactly what. Yeah, I could see him being that way again this year. Now, there are worse quarterbacks to me to take a chance on than a second-year quarterback. If you want to go for someone to break out and he's like on your bench, I don't love having quarterbacks on my bench to start the season. But if there was one, he seems like there's a candidate there. And I don't think that his price will get overblown like a lot of them do because the rushing upside isn't the exact same. It's not like, wow, it's just good.
It's good. Yeah, he inflated a little bit last year because of his rushing touchdowns, and I expect that to dip with Tyson in the end zone and ETN. I do want to ask real quick, Nick. So, not looking at their ADP currently, but going into drafts, you have more of like a preference on taking Olave a little bit early or like waiting a few rounds to go for Tyson, or are they kind of just like 1A 1B for you?
They're pretty close to 1A 1B for me, so which means I would likely wait for Tyson if he's going a few rounds lower. With that said, a lot of this is still baked into the concussion scare for me, and I that might be, I might have different opinions later on as I've thought about it more. But Olave got his head rocked so many times that it feels like just one more bad one and he's out for half the season. Jordan Tyson also has injury concerns that are pretty significant, so it's not without saying. I think that Jordan Tyson, where he gets me, is I think the touchdowns are going to be there for him. Whereas Olave is going to be hit or miss. Jordan Tyson's the big body dude who can get that jump ball in the end zone.
We saw a lot of great moments from Olave last year because of him getting like 10 receptions a game. And that's, even if the offense improves, that's going to dip. That efficiency is not going to be there. But I agree. I think that Olave, like, if he stays healthy, I think his floor is still where he was a couple of years ago with the ghost of Derek Carr. Like he's proven
Mhm.
himself to be a legit NFL wide receiver.
Yeah, I don't think you have to feel bad about having him on your team anymore. And what I guess the real thought I was having is that I think Jordan Tyson, he's going to steal a lot from Juwan Johnson, who actually ended up having a fairly good season last year. So what I think is going to happen is you're going to see Jordan Tyson come in and get his own command share and also take over a lot of those targets that Juwan Johnson was getting as a big body.
Yeah.
And there was a good amount of those targets to go around. And he's just a better receiver than Juwan Johnson. No offense to Juwan.
Take this with a grain of salt, and this is May, but right now on Fantasy Pros, the average ADP for Olave is wide receiver 11, and the average ADP for Tyson is wide receiver 37, around the Alec Pierce, Jacoby Myers range. That will go up.
It has to. There's no
Yeah.
chance it doesn't. He's a top 10 drafted wide receiver.
Yeah, but it's interesting. There is still a clear gap there, and I think that gap will remain with Olave on top, regardless
Mm-hmm.
the rest of the year. And before we move on, I do want to just give a quick shout out to their third round tight end pick, Oscar Delp out of Georgia. I just want to shout him out because I talked about on the draft reaction pod about all these blocking tight ends that were drafted and how it's very chaotic and how like fading rookie tight ends is the way to go this year. I do want to mention Delp, not just on his role on this team is, maybe coming in as tight end one over Johnson, but because Delp is a more pass catching tight end as his prototype. So he wasn't drafted as a blocking tight end. He was drafted, it looks like, to replace or, succeed Juwan Johnson. So Oscar Delp, if you really want to draft a rookie tight end this year, you don't get the Jets guy, Sadiq, or
Kenyon Sadiq. Yeah.
or Stowers in the Eagles. I think like Delp is like right around like my tight end 3 range, one of the few draftable rookies this year. Late.
I was feeling it until I saw they added Noah Fant. And Noah Fant is like, he's just annoying enough to scare me off of tight ends. You know what I mean? Not that Noah Fant is going to ever be a startable position, but he's like okay enough that they'll give him enough targets to just ruin it for everybody else.
Yeah, that's fair. Delp is would be drafted as like your late round gem. He's not drafted to play, really. He's just a dart throw. But yeah.
Fair. Okay, so let's move on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So last year they finished 8-9, and as I said earlier, they managed to miss the playoffs after starting off as what looked like one of the best teams in the NFL. You are bringing back Todd Bowles. They allowed him to come back. You do have Zach Robinson as a new offensive coordinator. Now, Zach Robinson came over from the Falcons, which were, that's definitely a good choice to hire him. Another NFC South failure. He was on the Rams before that, though, and that does get you leash and leeway for every team in the league at this point. And the defensive coordinator is still Todd Bowles. They don't have another one listed.
It's terrible. I can't believe he's back. And secondly, like Robinson, like he comes from the Rams. He's got that McVay clout. But geez, like the Falcons offense, like, okay, yeah, in a vacuum, like we saw Bijan was incredible last year. They didn't have great quarterback play, but there were some games where the Falcons shouldn't have lost, and a lot of that was on the offensive play calling. So go back and watch some of their close games, and you can tell me if it's like Cousins not clicking. Sometimes it was. He threw an interception in the end zone, or was it the offensive play calling? And it really looked like it was a lot of the time. So this is a bad hire. I'm sorry.
It's hard for me because what is going to inspire Baker Mayfield this year? Because I think what we saw was the difference with the Falcons and their what we saw with the difference between the Buccaneers and their start of the season versus the end of the season was that Baker Mayfield was healthy and playing very confident. And at the end of the season, I don't know if it was injuries or what, but he was playing very differently. He was overthrowing everybody constantly. You went from Tez Johnson showing up and having an amazing season to nobody doing well basically at all because Baker couldn't hit anyone.
Yeah.
This team lost Mike Evans, which crazy. Think about a Buccaneers team without Mike Evans. It's been how many years?
Yeah.
They're not even the same team.
No.
But they did add Kenneth Gainwell, so that's good. That Kenneth Gainwell is coming in as maybe the RB2 to start the year, but maybe the RB1 because Bucky Irving was given a time frame today to return from a shoulder surgery of either the start of camp or the fall.
The fall, which is very vague.
Todd Bowles stuff going on here now.
Mind
So
you, week one isn't still technically in the summertime too. So
yeah, yeah. Well, if it's the fall, that's bad news for everybody. So this team clearly has value on it. You have Emeka Egbuka. You have Chris Godwin. You have Tez Johnson, which is still a maybe hopeful. You have Ted Hurst, and then you've got Kate Otten, Jalen McMillan, which I think is a person for some people. He's a real reach for me, almost in any sort of redraft. Like he scares me a bit.
I'd like him if Ibuka and Tez Johnson and Ted Hurst went here because his rookie year was pretty dang solid. But they just have added 3 new guys since he missed all of last year of injury. So,
So my question to you is: there anything that would give you an indication that things are going to be better than they were at the end of last year? Because it went from great Emeka Egbuka to just the star receiver in this league to completely middling to disappearing act. You know, like there was. If you were relying on a buck at the end of the season last year, you did poorly at the end. And he did amazing at the beginning. So like there's this weird thing where I'm worried about everyone being overvalued.
it really depends on where the draft swings in terms of like, are we going to go with recency bias or are we going to go with overhyping or underhyping names? Because if it's recency bias, some of these guys could really fall. If it's just looking at it and how it was to start the year, slightly new regime with a new OC, then some players are going to get, overdrafted. Who was their offensive coordinator last year and where did he go?
Give me a second to look that up.
Okay. Because I'm just wondering, I can't recall if it was a firing. And again, I don't trust Todd Bowles' judgment. I want to clarify that. But if it was a firing, then in a sense, you can make an argument that the reason that they collapsed last year was because their offensive coordinator couldn't get it together. They brought in a new guy. If he just left, then what's the solution here?
It was Josh Grizzard, and he was fired.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at least this regime at least somewhat places the blame on the offensive coordinator. Because if you look at, post week 8, you look around then, like, no one was talking about the OC getting fired. No one was like, if he wasn't there next year, maybe he was a head coach. Like we've seen this Bucks OC to head coach pipeline happen at least once or twice already. So clearly there's some blame there. And there's a lot of questions for me, more than answers with these players. And there's some guys that maybe I'm singling out as like, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and get excited. I think the name that comes to mind is Ibuka. And I think you might feel the same.
A little bit. Like I want to see him succeed again. So there's the optimism of it because that means good things for the offense. But I'm so worried about where he's going to get drafted.
Yeah. Let's see where he's at right now.
Yeah, because I could see him being, because of how hot he started last year, I could see that being all that people remember, and he could be going in like the first 2 to 3 rounds. That's just too early for me right now with this team.
Right now, it looks like he's going as the wide receiver 24, right ahead of Mike Evans on the Niners.
Okay. So that feels okay. I would absolutely be in on him. Now, I wonder where Chris Godwin's going, because Chris Godwin feels like there's potential value there because he had basically a very... He was almost like a lost year. Like he did play, but it was just kind of... It didn't really amount to much. And I can see Chris Godwin coming back and having a pretty solid year this year.
He seems to be the guy that when you're hyping him up, maybe he disappoints, but like when you're counting him out, he does come back and like show up. Like Chris Godwin 2 years ago was one of the best receivers in fantasy, and that was before Ibuka, but when Evans was still there in his prime, getting 1,000 yards. So yeah, Godwin is an interesting one. Obviously, there's chemistry there with Baker Mayfield, chemistry with the team. He is kind of like that, OG leader of the offense now, just based on seniority alone.
A lot of this is also to me, and the reason why I'm hesitant with a lot of this, I want to know what's up with Bucky Irving, right? Because I think this team is identity could be a running team this year if Bucky Irving is healthy and ready to go, because they've added Kenneth Gainwell. They still have Sean Tucker, and that's a pretty good core. I mean, as much as I hate Arthur Smith, you saw how he used Kenneth Gainwell. That was an effective duo with 2 running backs that could run and catch. That's what this would be here. Now,
I was going to say, in theory, he's an upgrade over Rashad White from last year, at least, too.
yeah. And so I'm really curious because if Bucky Irving is healthy, I think the pass catchers being lower is where they probably should be, because I think they're going to try to lean heavier on the run, because the run game last year was just not very good. But Bucky Irving in health has been such an issue that I don't want to really guess one way or the other with this guy. Gosh.
The Bucks are such a. I mean, again, about Bowles, I think has been there most of this tenure of these stats. But like, so they were dead last in rushing in the 2022-2023 season. 2024, they shot up to, like, I want to say top 5 when Irving was healthy the whole year. He had a breakout. Rashad White was still good. I don't know where. Let me see. I'm gonna look up where they finished last year, and this is, obviously with Bucky Irving being hurt most of the year.
They were in the bottom half in both rushing yards and touchdowns last year. Like, they weren't bottom 5, but they were pretty bad.
So they say they went from terrible to really, really good to pretty dang bad.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of volatility there.
And to me, it's like, if Bucky Irving starts the season and he stays healthy the whole season, I think the pass catchers going in mid rounds, it could still provide good value. I don't think they'll be superstars per se. But if Bucky Irving is hurt, then one of Chris Godwin or Emeka Egbuka is going to just get so much volume that you're going to love it. And I would guess on Chris Godwin out of the two of those for volume. Yeah. So, like, if Bucky's hurt, I'm in on Chris Godwin more. And if Bucky's healthy, I'm in on Emeka more.
I don't want to make predictions, but, like, based on what they've said and, like, just the unknown of this running game, like, I'm going to lean towards Bucky not being a super exciting player this year. And most likely one that's going to be overdrafted relative to where there's a nightmare scenario with Bucky, I think, based on where you take him. He might not play this year. He might not be healthy. And I do like the upgrade of Kenneth Gainwell. And I think Sean Tucker's shown a lot. He had that amazing game against Buffalo, but I'm pretty turned off by this run game right now in terms of draft.
I will provide the foil to that in just one way, that he reminds me a lot about how I felt about Devon Achane at the start of last offseason. I felt very similarly out on him, and Achane just tore it up last year, had an amazing season against all odds.
If we get some news in July, August that Bucky's ready to go week 1, and they can say that confidently, and we see him practicing, I'm going to get excited about him in this run game more. But if there's still question marks when your drafts come around, obviously ADP will reflect this, but I don't know.
This is fair. Let me have the question for you that I think matters the most with this team. And it's hard to talk about it because we talk about fantasy football, and fantasy football is very offense oriented. The Bucks have had a bad defense, just bad defense. It's been awful for a while. Todd Bowles, as a head coach, is supposed to be, in theory, in ideology, ideals, all of the I's, he is supposed to be a defensive coach.
Mm-hmm.
And the defense has been bad his whole entire tenure, essentially. I might be hyperbolizing. There might have been a year or two where they were good. But he is still the defensive coordinator going this year, which means he called his own number and said, I can prove that I can do this. Because last year what we heard was someone needs to take play calling duties from him for the defense. Mm-hmm. Someone needs to take it over from him. He said, you think someone needs to take play calling duties over for me? I'm going to fire my offensive coordinator, which is a choice. Yeah. It's not the one I would make, but it was a choice. So here he is, Willie, because draft. Did the Bucks do anything to significantly address their defense that should, in theory, once again, make it better?
Well, so there was a lot of injuries on defense last year. Kalijah Cansey, who was a first-round DT a couple years ago, did not play. David Walker was a rookie. He was injured the whole year. I think Chris Braswell was banged up. I think maybe Vita Vea missed some time. I don't recall for sure. But Benjamin Morrison was another highly touted rookie pick last year, but barely played, missed some games. So there's a lot of injuries. So there's a benefit of a doubt there. In terms of a draft this year, they couldn't have done much better on defense. I think adding pieces. I think Ruben Bain was a great value in the first round. They got another solid rookie corner. I forget his name. It's slipping my mind in the second or third round. So if the defensive players that were, injured last year are healthy and the draft picks hit, the defense could take a step up. I just think that Bowles has had 4 years to prove that he's a competent defensive coordinator, and we've not seen this competent defense under his tenure. It's been average.
Really bad sometimes, average a lot of
Yeah.
it. Yeah, it was Keontae Scott is the guy you're thinking of.
Yeah, out of Miami. Yeah.
So to me, that's the question I need to ask myself about this team, because if the defense is better, then like I said, I think they're going to lean on that run game. And if this is also, part of this needs to be Bucky needs to be healthy, because that's what we haven't really seen from this team to maybe get them over the top of this middle out they've been doing. If the defense isn't better, all bets are out, and Todd Bowles has to be gone by week 6 or 7.
If not, yeah, I'm bringing him back was certainly a choice.
letting him hire the offensive coordinator from the other canned coach, Raheem Morris's Falcons, another choice. Just weird choices all around. This is a team that I don't personally like. Listen to what I said about the players. This team, I don't have a lot of hopes for next season and like turning around things. I think they're going to get worse, and it's just going to be a lost season overall.
It seems like, I mean, if they get better, that really doesn't mean much in terms of like if they get slightly better than last year, because I think the defense will be slightly better. The offense is kind of a wash because you lose Mike Evans and Bucky's uncertain. So even if everything is slightly better, that's still a 9-8 season, and that's not great. I will say though, and I think this probably will change too. I'm going to stop saying that. Baker Mayfield's going as a low end QB2. And I do like him. As someone who really liked him last year and was proved to be correct the first half of the season, I think that depending on where he goes, I think Baker Mayfield is your starting quarterback. You could really do worse. I think that, he might not have the upside like he did going into last year, but I would not be surprised at all if he finishes as a, QB 12, 13, 14. And that's
something happened midway through the season with Baker. He was a completely different player. So if he can come back and show at the beginning of what he had at the beginning of last year, even like for 80% of that, he's going to be a good pick for a quarterback. And I mean, my idea is take him and then just be willing to get off of him, especially if he's cheap.
Yeah. I mean, I like, going Baker if you can get him in like the 9th round and then, taking a shot on Shuck. Like that's a great quarterback strategy, I think, because you have that mix of like risk and reward. I think you really can't go wrong. Yeah.
Okay, let's get off of this team because they fill me with regret of talking about them like their season was regretting, and like they'll regret not firing Todd Bowles at the end of the season. And I'm sure that his name's Todd Bowles. I know that. I'm sorry. I keep calling him Todd Bowles because there's a joke that I had written in here that I didn't read, but you can go ahead and guess what it is. So let's talk about the Carolina Panthers now. That's fun. This is a good one. They went 8-9, but as opposed to being really depressed about it, they got to make the playoffs when they went 8-9. They were the ultimate winners of the NFC South. Just whoever can make it past the finish line gets in. And it's a team you can hate right now. They showed out and they didn't necessarily do great, but they did better than they had for a while. We have Bryce Young as a young quarterback who could still potentially be something in this league. We have Chuba Hubbard. We have Jonathan Brooks, who is back. Who knows what's going to happen with Jonathan Brooks? And then, you have some additions in more than a Freeling, Monroe Freeling, and Chris Brazel, which every time I see his name and it's spelled with 2 Z's like that, it makes me worried I'm reading something from a different website. But they lost Rico Dowdle, who was a spark plug for them. But other than that, I mean, the team is relatively the same. Head coach still Dave Canales. OC still Brad Idzik. They didn't lose their defensive coordinator, Giro Avero. He came back.
That's big. That was a big keep.
It was. And so they've added an offensive tackle. I'm totally. Did I already say it? Was it Freeling?
Monroe, yeah. First round rookie left tackle.
This is my good on writing down his nickname and not writing down his position. But I have a question for you, Willie.
Yeah.
And you're going to hate this question because it has nothing to do with fantasy football. How come when I read about Monroe Freeling online, he's called a hog molly?
That is, I'm spitballing here. I think there was some elite offensive line, either college or maybe it was like in the 70s or 80s. That was like one of the best offensive lines in the game, and they were like the O-line coach nicknamed the Hog Mollies, or there's something like that. Or maybe it's like an old college like nickname for great offensive line. It's basically like it kind of sounds. It is what it sounds like. It's a hog molly. It's like a big hog, and he's tough, but also he's molly, so he's kind of silly and likable. And Monroe Freeling has a mullet, and he just seems like a tough guy that's kind of silly, and that's a hog molly.
I couldn't figure that out because like I'm looking up all these Southern teams, right? And you'd think that there would be nicknames for all of them, but no, it's just Carolina that's throwing out these nicknames at me. They're calling this dude a hog molly, and I'm just reading some like what, like, okay, first, please, I just want to stop calling players livestock.
Fair.
But neither here nor there. I won't get on my soapbox on that. It's not that interesting. But I did look it up. Hog mollies is a popular slang term used in American football to describe massive, heavy-set offensive linemen who dominate in the trenches. I'm adding the bold words here. That's not really bold. This is just AI. It gained widespread fame thanks to former NFL executive Dave Gettleman, who I believe he has a history with Carolina. Just funny, you know. Anyway, neither here nor there. So let's look at Carolina.
I do want to add though, just to summarize all that, there's a scene in Blades of Glory, and of course the classic Kanye Jay-Z song. Like, what does that mean? Nobody knows what it means, but it gets the people going. It's provocative. That's what a hog molly is.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't stop looking it up because I'm like, are you calling him a hog molly? I get the idea. It's like it's a big pig, but like, how come I don't see it from every other team? How come it is just Carolina that's giving me these weird nicknames? They got their own flair there, you know. Okay, so let's talk about them last year. So you have Teteroa McMillan. He had what I would call a pretty darn good rookie year. Brazel, who we mentioned, used to play with Bryce Young, so there's familiarity there. And then Jalen Coker hopefully will start the year off healthy and stay on the team the whole time. So starting with just the pass catching trio on this team, I think there's a lot of potential here. But my question is, Teteroa, I think, is a lock for being a good fantasy player if he stays healthy. Jalen Coker, is this someone we can have some form of excitement for again going into year 3 with this guy?
I mean, I'm looking at his ADP right now. He's going around. This is actually kind of sad for him, but he's going around the same range as Matthew Golden. But honestly, like, Coker had some blow up games last year, but this is a guy who was an undrafted rookie out of Holy Cross University 2 years ago. And he's done nothing but prove himself in the NFL. And I think that looking at this depth chart, the fact that he's placed ahead of Xavier Legette, maybe that's just a formality with position and X versus Z, but he's a starting wide receiver going into the year. And I think that Coker, you know, if he's actually going pretty late in drafts, like, you know, Bryce Young's development notwithstanding, like, Coker's been pretty solid. You know, you could do worse as your wide receiver 4, that's for sure, on your team.
Yeah, I bring him up because I kind of like where he's at right here. Because, I mean, so they added John Mechie, who had, like, little flashes with the Texans. And then Chris Brazel, who could be something. I don't know that I'm, like, overly excited about Brazel right now. But Jalen Coker is that guy who, when they went to him, and I believe they went to him in the playoff game, if I'm right. Like, he ended up being, like, their de facto wide receiver 1 because Tet was covered pretty well.
Who were they playing in that game? Was it the Seahawks or the Rams?
Rams. It was the Rams, yeah. So I do believe that's what happened. And if it wasn't, then it was one of their last season games. But watching Coker, he had a great game. He had a phenomenal game. He showed up when they called on him.
Coker in the wild card had 9 receptions for 134 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, I was going to say, I saw that game, this last game, and that maybe this is a little bit of recency bias, but it's also the fact that Coker is someone who has had this hype around him on the team. I think he could really step in that wide receiver 2 role. So immediately, maybe this is too deep to start off with on the team, but that's my sleeper right there is Jalen Coker. Go get this guy late. Like, throw him on your team at the back end.
Yeah, there's nothing to not like about him. I mean, like, even if he's like doesn't have big games every week and he puts up some stinkers, like, if you're drafting him, he's going to be on your bench. And he's a player that, like, if he's on your bench, there's some upside there. Like, if, you know, God forbid T-Mac goes down, like, Coker, like we saw in the wildcard game, stepped up to be the wide receiver 1 and had a big game. So nothing to hate.
Now, Teteroa, what's the earliest you'd consider drafting him?
Personally, I think that it really depends on how much faith I have in this Panthers team. And honestly, like, my opinion's still out on Bryce Young. I mean, I love Bryce Young. He's the reason the Bears have Caleb Williams. So I'm always going to love Bryce Young. I think that a lot of my faith on the Panthers right now is the defense. I think they had some great additions there. I really like their DC. Um, and I think the Panthers could be really good this year. I think that regardless, like I said, yeah, Bryce Young, I think that T-Mac had a great year last year. I mean, you didn't really see it until the second half. He didn't like blow you away in fantasy, but he had a great year from a real life perspective. I mean, obviously, offensive rookie of the year. And there's nothing about his skill set or this team that makes me say like, oh, well, he's solid, but he's not going to like become like a wide receiver one in fantasy, because he absolutely could. And I think that third round for T-Mac might sound a little bit rich, but if he's my wide receiver one and I have drafted other players ahead of him that I feel really good about, like I'm not, if he's my wide receiver one going into the year, I'm not going to be upset about that.
Fair. Okay. I like it. He's one of those players that, again, I'm just kind of repeating you at this point. Like if he's my wide receiver one, if I have two strong running backs or like maybe a really strong tight end and a running back, I think the potential's there. It's a little scary, but also he's so sure. Like if he gets volume, he's going to capitalize on it.
Well, and here's my question. I was going to say, how could he get worse? Like, is he going to actually regress from last year? We see it sometimes, but there's nothing on this team of how it changed or how he is as a player that suggests he's going to finish worse than he did last year.
No, and if we can have like Jalen Coker or even Xavier Legette just show something competent on the other side from him, that might help him out a lot with the coverage.
Yeah, he's going to be the focal point, but like, yeah, if he can have other players step up, which I really think they could, I think the sky really is the limit of him. I would pump the brakes on getting super excited about him and the Panthers, but like, if again, similar to ETN on the Saints, but like if you told me he finished as a top 5 wide receiver this coming year, I wouldn't be like, oh wow,
Mm-hmm. Now the running backs, you've got Chuba Hubbard. We've kind of seen him. You know what to expect. There's potential for some upside there, but there's also potential for him to middle out. But you'll have Jonathan Brooks, who right now is the RB2 on this team, and they didn't seem to go add anyone else. Jonathan Brooks was a high draft pick who had injury history, and he injured himself again almost immediately when returning. However, do you think that there's a world in which Jonathan Brooks ends up as a fantasy relevant player this year?
From a talent perspective, injury notwithstanding, I think absolutely. He was the highest drafted running back 2 years ago. So think about like, we had Jeremiah Love, Van Ashton Genty, Jonathan Brooks. Like he was drafted in the early second round 2 years ago. The injury, it does scare me. There's a risk baked in here. And I think that you could look at it from two ways. One, the fact that the Panthers let go of Rico Dowdle either suggests that they have a lot of confidence in Chuba Hubbard being their RB1, or they have a lot of confidence in Jonathan Brooks being healthy. And one of those two things has to be true for them to let Dowdle go and not draft another running back. So I think that, my gut feeling says that Brooks is somebody to look at because he's going to go extremely late if drafted at all, just because we've never seen him. And depending on where Hubbard goes, he's somebody to look at as well. But I think that Brooks, from just a player perspective, he has all the upside in the world.
Yeah, and maybe I'm like a fool for these like reclamation projects, right? But I like Brooks as a sleeper again. So I've got 2 sleepers on this team. Coker and Brooks, if they're going late, are 2 players that I'd love to add on to my teams. Now, Hubbard, I mean, for me, it just depends on his health, right? Like last year, he wasn't bad, but he wasn't particularly good, and then he got injured. And then Rico Dowdle came out and made it look like, anyone could run behind that line. They've made the offensive line better, so Hubbard has this like sneaky potential to be top 10 in my opinion, but it doesn't feel great. So he feels like he's going to be one of those dead zone running backs that you're going to just have to make a gut choice on.
If he ends up having a good season, like if he's your flex, like that's solid. I mean, and I'm glad you mentioned the offensive line because it was pretty solid last year, and it only got better. Not only did they draft Monroe Freeling, who may sit this year, but they also added Rasheed Walker, who was the Packers' starting left tackle for most of last year. They got him in free agency. And Ikem Ekwonu he tore his patellar tendon in that Rams wildcard game. So it's going to be between Rasheed Walker and Freeling for that left tackle spot. And then, they still have a solid interior as well. So this is a top 10 O-line, I think, on paper in the league. So that really just benefits the whole offense.
It really does. I mean, we've talked about. I know I've mentioned over and over again how offensive line is really the only part of this team, any of these teams that matters. If you do believe, like Willie's saying right here, that this is a top 10 O line, draft one of these guys early. Draft Hubbard or draft Tetaroa. Draft both maybe, but I don't go crazy. Don't listen to that. This is my first episode of the season. Don't draft both just on what I said right there. But buy in. If you think that offensive line is going to get better, buy in that they'll also get better as players, because that's kind of how this works. Once the plays can actually develop, you suddenly see players look a lot better than they did when the plays are breaking down in 2 seconds.
Exactly. And the competition between Dottle and Hubbard was a bit of a nightmare at times, depending on who you're starting. But Brooks doesn't provide. He provides upside, but he doesn't provide the same level of immediate backfield split competition with Hubbard. So there's something to like there. And I do want to just shout out the defense real quick, because it was pretty solid last year. It helped them get to the playoffs, and they signed Devin Lloyd, who was a monster on the Jaguars last year, one of the best defensive players in football. They signed Jalen Phillips from the Eagles. He was a big boost to the Eagles defense down the stretch after they traded for him. J.C. Horn's one of the best corners in the league. We saw a lot of good things from Nick Scorton last year, who was a rookie. And I believe that Derek Brown was injured a lot of last year, and he's one of the best defensive tackles in the game, and he's back.
So check that out, and also add in the fact that last year they had the second least rushing touchdowns, or they were tied with a few other teams for the second least rushing touchdowns. But they were mid in the league in terms of rushing yards. There's some positive regression there. So I might be in the middle of talking myself more into Hubbard, especially if he's in round 4, round 5. RB2 Chuba might just be a hit.
Chuba's going RB27 right now.
Oh yeah, so maybe 5 or 6 even then. In that case, I'm feeling pretty. Chuba's rising up my ranks right this second in my mind. So
I like it.
So the NFC South. Now that we've talked about them, they do have a schedule where they go against the AFC North. So that's teams that were formerly known for their defense. That I don't know how their defenses are all looking right now. The Browns, the Bengals, the Ravens, Browns, Bengals, Ravens, Steelers. There we go. We got there. Yeah. Middle of the pack, but I can also see those guys coming back pretty strong year over year.
There's a lot of changes. It's when you look at everything overall, it's about the same as last year.
Mm-hmm. And then they get to go against the NFC North and one matching place AFC West team. So I think that it could be a difficult year for them, but also these defenses don't exactly scare me. So this feels like a pretty neutral schedule just in May, as far as players go. So this isn't like a huge boon or a huge negative.
And also remember, they're getting to play against the NFC South 6 times, so that helps.
It does. Okay, way too early prediction, Willie. NFC South finishing.
All right, way too early. I'm feeling the Panthers to repeat. I think the Panthers maybe have the best defense in this division. And again, Bryce Young breaking out notwithstanding, that doesn't really matter as long as he stays where he's at. I still like this offense quite a bit. So I'm going to go Panthers. 2 and 3 is close for me. If I were to go with my gut, I would say Saints. But I do think that I have faith in Baker Mayfield to make it work, but I don't have faith in Bowles. So actually, I'm going to say Saints and Bucks 2 and 3. I think they probably finish with around the same 9 and 8 record. But and then the Falcons, it's TBD. But I could see the Falcons finishing around 7 wins. I mean, they could break out, but I don't believe in Tua or Penix enough to predict them anywhere near the top. So I'm going Panthers number 1. That's my most confident pick here.
Okay, I'm going to go the opposite. Not the opposite, but I'm going to start off with, I'm going to say the Saints win. I think the NFC South is one of those cursed divisions where they don't ever have repeats usually. And I think the Saints just come out and have, 1 win more. Panthers are my number 2 though. So it wouldn't be a shock if Panthers did win. Those are the 2 teams that I think are competing for it. And then after that, I have Falcons 3rd and Bucks 4th. I don't like the feel of this Bucks team right now. It feels like it ended on a really negative note. And I don't know that they have what it takes to turn that around.
Yeah, the only thing that gets me excited about the Bucks is just Baker Mayfield and what we've seen the past couple years, and maybe Ibuka breaking out, some defensive additions. But overall, when you look at these coaches and this staff, like Bowles stands out as the weakest. Obviously we haven't seen enough of the other three, but he still stands out as the weakest, and that's something. In a division like this, you kind of have to lean. But
yeah. Okay, so that was our NFC South deep dive